My name is Lucy, I'm 29, and for 7 years I've helped sick children as a pediatric nurse. That experience shaped how I care for my daughter Emily, now 8 months old. My mother-in-law Judith, a former midwife, strongly disagrees with my modern approach to parenting. She believes everything should be natural, no matter the risks. I never imagined her beliefs would lead to something so horrifying during what was supposed to be a simple family gathering. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe parents should stand up against dangerous, natural parenting advice, even from family. I first met James at a friend's barbecue 5 years ago. He worked in tech designing software for medical devices, which gave us plenty to talk about since I was already established in my career as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. We connected immediately over our shared interest in healthcare innovation, though from different angles. His thoughtful questions about my experiences with patients showed a compassion that made my heart flutter. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. When James proposed a year later, I was ecstatic. That's when I first met his mother, Judith, during our engagement dinner. She hugged me tightly but studied me with narrowed eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. The first red flag appeared when we began wedding planning. Judith had opinions on everything from my dress to our vows. She insisted on traditional elements that neither James nor I particularly wanted. James has always dreamed of a church wedding, she told me privately, though he had specifically mentioned wanting an outdoor ceremony. When I gently corrected her, she patted my hand dismissively. A mother knows her son better than anyone. James always smoothed things over, saying, "Mum just gets excited about family events." I accepted his closeness with his mother as a sign of strong family values, something I appreciated coming from my own tight-knit family. What I didn't realize was that he wasn't just close to his mother. He struggled to disagree with her about anything. When we announced my pregnancy 2 years into our marriage, Judith immediately appointed herself as our pregnancy guru. She proudly informed us she had been a home birth midwife for 15 years before retiring, which explained her strong opinions about medical interventions. "You won't be taking those synthetic prenatal vitamins, will you?" she asked during my first trimester. "They're filled with chemicals. I have natural supplements that worked for all my mothers." I explained that my obstetrician had prescribed specific vitamins with the right balance of folic acid and iron. "These are backed by extensive research," I added, trying to sound respectful while standing firm. Judith scoffed. "Research funded by pharmaceutical companies. They don't care about you or my grandchild." These smaller disagreements continued throughout my pregnancy. Judith questioned every medical appointment, suggesting they were unnecessary. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years without all these ultrasounds and tests," she'd say. James initially supported my decisions, but as the months passed, I noticed him wavering. "Maybe Mum has a point about some things," he'd suggest after her visits. She did deliver hundreds of babies safely. I tried to explain the difference between low-risk home births with trained midwives and the blanket rejection of modern medicine, but these conversations often ended with tension. I started dreading Judith's visits, which became more frequent as my due date approached. When I went into labor, things didn't progress as expected. After 20 hours, my doctor recommended a C-section due to fetal distress. James looked terrified, torn between the medical advice and his mother's voice in his ear. Judith had arrived at the hospital despite our wishes and was insisting that I just needed more time. "Your body knows what to do," she kept saying. "These doctors just want to perform surgery for the insurance money." In the end, the decision was made for us when monitors showed Emily's heart rate dropping dangerously low. The C-section saved both of us, something I later reminded Judith when she referred to Emily's birth as unfortunate and suggested the emergency had been manufactured. The first weeks at home with Emily were a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. I struggled with breastfeeding and postpartum recovery from major surgery. Instead of practical support, Judith brought herbal teas she claimed would increase my milk production and homemade salves for my incision that hadn't been approved by my doctor. Our first major argument happened when I found Judith giving Emily a spoonful of honey-based mixture. When I frantically asked what she was doing, knowing infants shouldn't have honey due to botulism risks, she seemed offended. "It's a natural immune booster. All my grandchildren had it from day one. Emily is only 6 weeks old," I said, taking my daughter from her arms. "Honey can cause infant botulism. It's extremely dangerous for babies under 1 year." Judith rolled her eyes. "That's just what doctors tell new mothers to scare them. My remedy has been in our family for generations." When I showed her medical research on my phone, she dismissed it entirely. James came into the room during our heated discussion and, to my dismay, didn't immediately back me up. "Mum wouldn't do anything to hurt Emily," he said weakly. That night, after Judith left, I made it clear to James that evidence-based medical care for our daughter wasn't negotiable. He agreed, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. That was when I first understood how deeply his mother's influence ran and how challenging this would become for our family. The first few months of Emily's life should have been a joyful time of adjustment and bonding in our suburban home with its nursery I'd carefully painted sage green. Instead, it became a battleground of parenting philosophies with Judith as an ever-present critic of my unnatural choices. Judith lived only 20 minutes away and used her spare key given to her by James for emergencies to drop by unannounced several times a week. I'd often find her rearranging things in Emily's room or questioning my parenting decisions. One afternoon, I returned from a quick shower to find Judith had emptied the refrigerator of the breast milk I'd painstakingly pumped and stored. "This has been sitting too long," she declared. "Breast milk should be fed immediately for maximum benefits. Storing it kills the living properties." I was devastated. Those small bottles represented hours of effort during Emily's naps. "The CDC says properly stored breast milk is safe for days in the refrigerator," I explained, fighting back tears of frustration. "The CDC is in the pocket of the formula companies," she countered dismissively. When Emily started solids at 6 months, I carefully introduced purees following our pediatrician's recommendations. I returned from a nursing shift one day to find James feeding Emily mashed adult food that his mother had prepared. "Mum says the store-bought baby food has preservatives that will damage her developing gut," James explained, looking slightly uncomfortable but proceeding anyway. "Did you check for allergens?" I asked, noticing bits of foods we hadn't yet introduced. "Mum says early exposure prevents allergies," he replied, repeating Judith's wisdom as fact despite the conflicting advice from our pediatrician. The incidents continued escalating. During a heatwave, I set up a fan and air conditioner in Emily's room to keep her comfortable. Judith moved Emily to a stuffy room, claiming air conditioning weakens the immune system. A little sweat is nature's way of strengthening her. I found Emily overheated and fussy, her delicate skin red and irritated. The most alarming incident involved essential oils. Emily had developed sensitive skin with patches of eczema our dermatologist was helping us manage. I discovered Judith applying lavender and tea tree oil directly to Emily's skin, causing an angry rash. "These are natural healing oils," Judith insisted when I confronted her. "Natural doesn't automatically mean safe," I countered. "Many essential oils are too strong for infant skin and can cause chemical burns. Some can even affect hormones." "You and your fear-mongering," Judith sighed dramatically. "This is why Emily gets sick. You don't allow her natural remedies." Each time I established a boundary, Judith would call James at work, portraying me as controlling and overprotective. James would come home conflicted, torn between supporting me and appeasing his mother. "Lucy, maybe we could compromise on some things," he'd suggest. "Mum raised 3 healthy children using these methods." "This isn't about compromise," I'd try to explain. "This is about Emily's safety based on current medical understanding." I felt increasingly isolated. Judith had begun telling extended family members that I was neurotic and preventing her from having a relationship with her granddaughter. Family gatherings became tense, with relatives asking why I was so strict about things that seemed harmless to them. My own mother, living across the country, became my lifeline through daily phone calls. "Stand your ground, honey," she'd encourage. "You're the mother. Your decisions about Emily's well-being are final." My friend and fellow nurse Sarah became my local confidant. Having witnessed the consequences of natural remedies gone wrong in our pediatric ward, she understood my concerns weren't overreactions. "Document everything," Sarah advised after I told her about the essential oil incident. "If things escalate, you'll need records." I didn't want to think about needing documentation against my mother-in-law, but I started keeping a journal anyway. Something in Sarah's concerned expression told me this conflict was far from over. As Emily approached her 6-month checkup, the topic of vaccinations became our new battleground. As a pediatric nurse, I'd seen firsthand the devastating effects of preventable diseases on children whose parents had chosen not to vaccinate. There was no question in my mind that Emily would follow the recommended vaccination schedule. Judith, however, had other ideas. When she discovered Emily's upcoming appointment included scheduled vaccinations, she launched an aggressive campaign against them. "Those vaccines are full of toxins," she declared during Sunday dinner at her house. mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde, they'll damage Emily's developing brain. I explained that modern vaccines have been reformulated, that ingredients were present in minuscule amounts, and that extensive safety testing had been conducted. The risks of the diseases far outweigh any potential risks of vaccines, I added. That's what they want you to believe, Judith countered. I've done my research. The following week, Judith arrived at our house with a stack of printouts from anti-vaccination websites and several self-published books on vaccine injuries. James, you need to read these before you allow Lucy to poison your daughter, she said deliberately, handing the materials only to him. I watched with growing concern as James flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed. Some of this looks concerning, but he admitted. James, those aren't peer-reviewed medical journals, I said carefully. Many of those claims have been thoroughly debunked by extensive research. But what if they're right, he asked. What if we're taking an unnecessary risk? I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. After years of working in pediatrics, I knew the real risks came from leaving children unprotected against preventable diseases. Remember Tommy? I asked quietly. Tommy had been a 4-year-old patient of mine who developed complications from measles. He had spent weeks in the hospital fighting for his life because his community's vaccination rates had dropped below the threshold for herd immunity. Or baby Sophia with pertussis. Another case that still haunted me, the infant struggling to breathe, her tiny body racked with coughing fits, so severe she fractured ribs. James looked troubled. Those are rare cases though, right? They're becoming less rare as vaccination rates drop, I explained. And they're completely preventable. The discussion came to a head during a family dinner at our home. Judith had invited herself over and brought James's brother and his wife, apparently hoping for backup. I delivered babies for 15 years, Judith announced loudly over the main course, and the healthiest children were always the unvaccinated ones. Their immune systems weren't compromised. This was a correlation without evidence, but before I could respond, she continued. Did you know doctors get bonuses for fully vaccinating their patients? They're incentivized to push these shots on innocent children. That's completely false, I said firmly. As someone who works in healthcare, I can tell you that's simply not true. Then why are you so insistent? Judith challenged. Why not let Emily's natural immunity develop? Because natural immunity to something like polio comes at the cost of potentially being paralyzed. I replied, struggling to maintain my composure. Natural immunity to Hib disease might come with meningitis. The price of natural immunity can be permanent disability or death. James's brother Matt surprisingly spoke up. Our kids are vaccinated, Mom. The science is pretty clear on this. Judith looked betrayed. You too, I raised you to think critically about what doctors tell you. This isn't about being against medicine, I explained. It's about making evidence-based choices for Emily's health. After dinner, James and I had a long, tense conversation. To my relief, he ultimately agreed to follow our pediatrician's recommendations, though I could see he was conflicted. I trust you, he said finally. You're the medical professional in the family. When Judith learned of our decision after Emily received her vaccines, she became cold and distant. Her visits decreased, but her passive-aggressive comments increased. I hope Emily doesn't develop autism, she'd say casually. So many children change right after those shots. I explained repeatedly that extensive studies had found no link between vaccines and autism, but Judith wasn't interested in evidence that contradicted her beliefs. One evening, while picking up toys in the living room, I overheard Judith in the kitchen with James. You're letting Lucy poison your child with those chemicals, she said in a hushed, urgent voice. What kind of father allows that your grandfather would be so disappointed in you? I expected James to defend our decision to defend me. Instead, there was a long pause. Maybe we should have researched more, he said finally. Lucy was so insistent. My heart sank. Despite his agreement, James was still susceptible to his mother's manipulation. It became increasingly clear that I couldn't trust Judith alone with Emily. What other medical decisions might she undermine when I wasn't present? That night, James and I had our first major fight about his mother's influence. You need to set boundaries with her, I insisted. She actively undermines my parenting and our joint decisions about Emily's health. She's just concerned, James defended. She loves Emily. Love isn't enough if her concern leads to dangerous choices, I countered. What if she gives Emily something she shouldn't have while babysitting? What if she ignores medical advice during an emergency? James accused me of being paranoid, but eventually conceded that clearer boundaries might help. He promised to speak with his mother about respecting our decisions as Emily's parents. I wanted to believe him, but the seed of doubt had been planted. How could I trust Judith with Emily's well-being when she fundamentally rejected modern medicine? And how could I fully trust James when he couldn't stand firm against his mother's influence? Little did I know these vaccination disagreements were just the prelude to a far more dangerous situation that would force all of us to confront the real consequences of Judith's natural parenting beliefs. As summer transitioned to early fall, Judith announced the annual family gathering at her spacious country home about 2 hours outside the city. These gatherings typically brought together James's extended family, his brother Matt with his wife and 2 children, Judith's sister Barbara and her family, and various cousins with their kids. James was excited about introducing Emily to relatives who hadn't yet met her. Despite my reservations about spending an entire weekend with Judith, I agreed to attend for James's sake. I hoped that in a group setting, Judith might be less focused on criticizing my parenting. "It'll be fine," James reassured me as we packed the car. "Mum always behaves better with the whole family around." We arrived Friday evening to the century-old farmhouse Judith had inherited from her parents. It sat on 5 acres with apple trees and a small pond picturesque in the golden autumn light. Several cars were already parked in the gravel driveway. The initial greetings were cordial, with everyone cooing over 8-month-old Emily. Judith played the gracious host, showing us to the guest room she'd prepared with an antique crib that had apparently been in the family for generations. "I checked and it meets all current safety standards," she said pointedly, as if anticipating my concerns. I thanked her sincerely, relieved that she was making an effort. Perhaps this weekend would be peaceful after all. That hope evaporated the next morning at breakfast, when I noticed Judith's niece Carol's son Tyler, looking flushed and lethargic at the table. The 5-year-old was picking at his food while developing what looked suspiciously like a rash on his face and neck. "Is Tyler feeling okay?" I asked Carol with concern. "Oh, he's just a bit under the weather," she replied casually. "Mum thinks it's chickenpox. All kids get it eventually." My nursing instincts kicked into high gear. "Chickenpox? How long has he had symptoms?" Carol shrugged. "The fever started yesterday. The spots appeared this morning." I immediately glanced at Emily, happily sitting in her high chair across the room. Carol, chickenpox is highly contagious, and it can be dangerous for infants. Emily is too young to have received the varicella vaccine. "It's just chickenpox," Judith interjected, bringing a platter of pancakes to the table. "All of us had it as children. It's a normal childhood illness." "It's not just a mild illness for babies," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. "Infants under 12 months have a higher risk of complications like pneumonia or encephalitis. That's why it's better to get it young," Judith declared confidently. "Get it over with while the immune system is developing." I was stunned by the casual dismissal of a serious health risk to Emily. "We need to keep Emily away from Tyler," I insisted, picking her up from the high chair. "You're overreacting," Judith said with a dismissive wave. "Natural childhood illnesses strengthen the immune system. All this protection makes children weak." I retreated to our guest room with Emily texting James, who had gone for a morning run. When he returned, I explained the situation. "We should probably leave," I said. "Emily's too young to be exposed to chickenpox." James looked torn. "Are you sure it's that serious? I had chickenpox as a kid and I was fine." "You weren't 8 months old," I pointed out. "The younger the child, the more dangerous it can be. This isn't about being overprotective. This is basic medical knowledge." James reluctantly agreed to discuss our early departure with his mother after breakfast. Meanwhile, I kept Emily in our room, venturing out only when necessary and keeping her away from Tyler. After lunch, I needed to prepare a bottle for Emily and left her briefly with James. When I returned a few minutes later, James was helping his father with something in the garage, and Emily was nowhere to be found. Panicked, I searched the nearby rooms, finally hearing Emily's distinctive giggle from Judith's sewing room. I pushed open the door to find a scene that made my blood run cold. Emily was sitting on a playmat directly next to Tyler, who was now covered in chickenpox blisters. Judith sat watching them, a satisfied smile on her face. "What are you doing?" I gasped, rushing to pick up Emily. "I specifically said Emily needs to be kept away from Tyler." "They were just playing," Judith said calmly. "Emily needs to build her immunity naturally. Chickenpox is much worse for adults, you know. I'm doing her a favor." The deliberate nature of what she'd done hit me like a physical blow. "Did you intentionally expose my daughter to chickenpox against my explicit wishes as her mother?" Judith didn't deny it. "All my children and grandchildren got chickenpox this way. It's how it's been done for generations. A little pox party, much safer than that vaccine with its chemicals. You had no right, I said, my voice shaking with rage and fear. Intentionally exposing an infant to disease isn't your decision to make. It's dangerous and completely inappropriate. Oh, stop being dramatic, Judith scoffed. This is why modern parents have such sickly children. All this protection from normal childhood experiences weakens their systems. I stormed out with Emily, finding James coming back from the garage. Your mother deliberately exposed Emily to chickenpox. I told him, not bothering to hide my fury. She put Emily in direct contact with Tyler after I explicitly said to keep them apart. James looked shocked, then uncomfortable. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm. Mom has old school ideas about these things. This isn't about old school versus new school, I said. This is about respecting our decisions as Emily's parents and basic safety. We're leaving. Now. The news spread quickly through the gathering. The family divided into camps, those who thought I was overreacting and those who understood my concern. Barbara, Judith's sister, surprisingly took my side. Judith has always been extreme about these things, she told me quietly as we packed. I'm sorry this happened. As we prepared to leave, Emily felt unusually warm. I took her temperature 100.2 Udagave. It was beginning sooner than I expected, which meant she'd likely been exposed even earlier than the incident I'd discovered. She has a fever. I told James, my heart sinking. It's starting already. Maybe it's just a coincidence, James suggested weakly, but the guilt in his eyes showed he didn't believe it. We said hasty goodbyes with Judith, insisting I was overreacting. A fever is the body's natural way of fighting infection, she called after us. Don't suppress it with those chemical medications. As we drove away, James finally spoke. I'm sorry about my mom, but I really think she believed she was helping. That's the problem, I replied. She thinks she knows better than modern medicine, better than me, as Emily's mother, better than everyone. And now Emily could suffer because of it. The gravity of the situation was just beginning to dawn on James. As Emily's temperature continued to climb and our baby grew increasingly uncomfortable, we faced a long drive home with the knowledge that the worst was likely still to come. We'd been on the road for about an hour when Emily's condition noticeably worsened. Her fever had climbed to 101.5 degrees Celsius, and she was becoming increasingly fussy, uncomfortable in her car seat, despite the cool air conditioning. Her face was flushed, and I noticed the beginning of small red spots on her chest when I checked her temperature again. We need to stop at a pharmacy, I told James, my voice taut with worry. We need infant fever reducer and some calamine lotion for when the blisters form. James nodded grimly, the reality of Emily's illness finally sinking in. He pulled into a shopping centre with a pharmacy at the next exit. I'll wait with her in the car, he offered. You know exactly what we need. I hurried into the pharmacy, grabbing pediatric acetaminophen calamine lotion and other supplies we'd need for the coming days. While paying, I called our pediatrician's after-hours line to alert them about Emily's exposure and developing symptoms. The nurse advised bringing Emily in immediately upon our return to the city, emphasizing the risks of chickenpox in infants under 1 year. When I returned to the parking lot 10 minutes later, I was shocked to find the car locked. Through the window, I could see Emily crying in her car seat while James was on his phone. I knocked on the window, bags in hand, but James held up one finger in a wait gesture. I knocked again, more insistently. Our daughter was sick and clearly distressed. James reluctantly rolled down his window slightly. Lucy, before we go, I need you to call my mother and apologize for how you spoke to her, he said, his voice unnaturally firm. I stared at him in disbelief. What, your mother deliberately exposed our infant daughter to a disease that could cause serious complications, and you want me to apologize? She's really upset, James insisted. She's crying on the phone. She says she was just trying to help Emily build natural immunity the way all kids used to. She feels attacked and misunderstood. James, unlock the door right now, I demanded. Emily needs medicine for her fever. This isn't the time to discuss your mother's feelings. He hesitated. Mom says the fever is part of the natural healing process. Maybe we shouldn't interfere. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In the back seat, Emily's cries intensified. James, our daughter is sick because your mother deliberately exposed her to a virus against our wishes. Emily is too young for the chickenpox vaccine, which is why we need to protect her from exposure. Let me in the car right now. Just call Mum first, he insisted. She wants to explain her perspective. She says modern medicine has scared you into overreacting. I realized with growing horror that James was still on the phone with his mother, who was apparently coaching him through this confrontation. Emily's wails grew more distressed in the background. "Put your mother on speakerphone," I demanded. James reluctantly complied, and Judith's voice filled the air. "Lucy, you need to understand that I've raised 3 children and have 5 grandchildren. Chickenpox is a normal part of childhood. The natural immunity Emily will develop is far superior to any vaccine." "Judith," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "what you did was not only disrespectful to me as Emily's mother, it was potentially dangerous. Infants under 1 year can develop serious complications from chickenpox." "That's just fear-mongering from pharmaceutical companies," she dismissed. "James had chickenpox at 6 months old and he was perfectly fine." "Medical understanding has advanced since then," I replied. "We now know the risks are higher for young infants. James, please unlock the door. Emily needs medication." "Not until you agree to be more respectful to my mother," James insisted, clearly parroting words being fed to him. "You embarrassed her in front of the whole family." My patience snapped. "If you don't unlock this car right now, I'm calling the police. Preventing a sick infant from receiving medical care is endangerment. Is that what you want, James' police involvement?" The threat of outside authorities seemed to break whatever spell Judith had cast. James's face paled and he quickly unlocked the doors. "She doesn't mean that," Judith's voice came through the phone. "Lucy, you're being hysterical." I grabbed the phone from James. "Judith, what you did was wrong. It was dangerous, disrespectful, and potentially illegal. Right now, I need to care for my daughter. We'll discuss your access to Emily after she recovers." I ended the call and handed the phone back to a stunned James. I climbed into the back seat to administer Emily's medication, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and fear. "We're not going home," I told James firmly. "We're going straight to the emergency room. Emily's fever is rising and I want her evaluated by doctors immediately." The drive to the nearest hospital was tense and silent, except for Emily's whimpers. James attempted several apologies, but I was focused entirely on monitoring our daughter's condition. By the time we reached the emergency room, Emily's temperature had risen to 102 degrees Celsius, and the red spots were spreading across her torso. The triage nurse took one look at Emily and our description of her chickenpox exposure and immediately prioritized her case. "Chickenpox in infants under 12 months is considered high risk," she explained, confirming what I already knew from my nursing experience. The pediatric doctor who examined Emily frowned deeply when we explained how she'd been exposed. "Intentional exposure of an infant to varicella is not recommended under any circumstances," he stated firmly. "The risks of complications are significantly higher in babies this young." James looked increasingly uncomfortable as the doctor ordered blood tests and discussed potential complications. We needed to watch for secondary skin infections, pneumonia, dehydration, encephalitis. The possibility that our daughter could develop a serious, potentially life-threatening condition because of his mother's actions was finally hitting home. "Will she be okay?" he asked in a small voice. "We'll monitor her closely," the doctor replied. "She'll need to be admitted for observation given her age and fever. We'll start antiviral medication, which can help reduce the severity if given early enough." When the doctor asked exactly how Emily had been exposed, James hesitated before I explained that his mother had deliberately placed Emily in contact with an infected child against our wishes. The doctor's expression darkened. "I'm obligated to note in her medical record that this was an intentional exposure of an infant to a communicable disease. Depending on the course of her illness, this could potentially be reported as a child endangerment issue." James paled. "My mother didn't mean to harm Emily. She just has old-fashioned beliefs about natural immunity." "Regardless of intent," the doctor replied. "Intentionally exposing an infant to a virus that could cause serious complications goes against all medical recommendations. It's not a matter of parenting philosophy, it's a safety issue." As Emily was admitted and settled into a pediatric isolation room, the gravity of the situation finally seemed to penetrate James's lifelong conditioning. His phone rang repeatedly, his mother calling back, but for the first time he silenced it without answering. "I'm sorry," he whispered as we watched nurses start an IV in our crying daughter's tiny arm. "I should have protected her better. I was too emotionally exhausted to offer absolution." The next several days would be critical for Emily's recovery, and I couldn't help but wonder how our family would recover from this betrayal of trust, if it could at all. Emily spent 3 days in the pediatric ward, her tiny body fighting the virus that Judith had so cavalierly exposed her to. I barely left her side, sleeping in the uncomfortable recliner next to her hospital crib. The blisters spread across her entire body, including inside her mouth and throat, making it painful for her to eat or drink. The medical team monitored her closely for signs of pneumonia or other complications, administering antiviral medications, fever reducers, and IV fluids when she couldn't take enough by bottle. James alternated between the hospital and work, his face growing more haggard each day. His phone constantly lit up with messages and calls from his family, particularly his mother. I noticed he had started declining most of Judith's calls, answering only occasionally, and stepping into the hallway when he did. On the second day, a hospital social worker named Tanya came to speak with us. She sat down with a clipboard and gentle expression that didn't quite mask the seriousness of her questions. "I need to ask some questions about how Emily contracted chickenpox," she began. "Our records indicate it was an intentional exposure." James looked at the floor while I explained what had happened at Judith's house. "And did your mother-in-law understand that you didn't want Emily exposed?" Tanya asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "I explicitly stated that Emily needed to be kept away from the infected child. I explained the medical risks for infants under 1 year." Tanya made notes. "And the exposure happened anyway, deliberately?" "Yes," I said. "I found Emily placed directly next to the sick child. When confronted, my mother-in-law confirmed she did it intentionally to give Emily natural immunity." "I see." Tanya's expression remained neutral, but her continued note-taking was concerning. "You should know that intentional exposure of an infant to a potentially dangerous illness can be considered a form of child endangerment, particularly since your wishes as parents were explicitly overridden." James finally spoke up. "My mother wouldn't want to hurt Emily. She just has different beliefs about health." "Intent doesn't change the potential harm," Tanya explained gently. "From a child protection standpoint, putting a child at medical risk against parental wishes is concerning regardless of the grandmother's beliefs." She asked several more questions about our home situation, Judith's regular access to Emily, and whether there had been other incidents of medical advice being ignored. Before leaving, Tanya handed us her card. "For now, this is informational. We're documenting the circumstances of Emily's illness, but I'm not filing a formal child protection report at this time. However, I strongly recommend establishing clear boundaries with anyone who might make medical decisions for Emily that contradict professional advice or your wishes as parents." The implicit warning was clear: if we continued allowing Judith unsupervised access to Emily, and she made other dangerous health decisions, we could potentially face questions about our own fitness as parents for not protecting our daughter. After Tanya left, James sat heavily in the chair beside me. "This is serious, isn't it? Like legally serious." "Yes," I said simply. "Your mother's actions put Emily at risk. The fact that she did it deliberately against explicit instructions makes it worse." "What do we do now?" he asked. "I don't know about we," I replied, my voice steady despite my exhaustion. "But I know what I'm doing. When Emily is discharged, we're not going back to our house. I'm taking her to Sarah's until I can be certain she'll be safe." "What you're leaving?" James looked stricken. "I'm protecting our daughter," I corrected. "Your mother has a key to our house. She comes over whenever she wants. You've been unwilling or unable to set boundaries with her. Until that changes, I can't trust that Emily will be safe." "I'll change the locks," he offered desperately. "This isn't just about locks, James. It's about you prioritizing your mother's feelings over Emily's safety. It's about you sitting in that car keeping our sick daughter from medicine because your mother told you to." His face crumpled with shame. "I don't know what happened to me. When Mom gets upset, I can't think clearly. That's exactly the problem. And until you can address that, I need to keep Emily safe." Emily was discharged on the 4th day. Her condition improved, but still covered in scabs that would take weeks to fully heal. The doctor emphasized watching for any signs of secondary infection and explained that some of the deeper blisters might leave permanent scars. As promised, I took Emily to Sarah's apartment. Sarah had already prepared her spare room for us, setting up a borrowed crib and stocking the kitchen with easy meals. James followed us there, watching helplessly as I settled Emily in her temporary home. "What do you need me to do to fix this?" he finally asked. I looked at him, this man I loved who had failed to protect our daughter when it mattered most. "3 things," I said firmly. "First, therapy. not couples counselling, individual therapy for you to address your enmeshment with your mother. Second, clear non-negotiable boundaries with Judith, including no unsupervised contact with Emily. Third, if those two things don't happen, we need to discuss separation because I will not raise our daughter in an environment where her health and safety are compromised. James looked shocked at the ultimatum, but the events of the past few days had left me with no room for compromise where Emily's safety was concerned. "I'll do it," he said after a long pause. "I'll find a therapist tomorrow." "Good," I replied, not yet ready to offer forgiveness. "That's a start." Over the next few weeks, our new reality took shape. James began twice-weekly therapy sessions with a counsellor specialising in family dynamics. I participated in one session where the therapist explained the concept of enmeshment, the unhealthy blurring of boundaries between parent and child that had left James unable to function as an independent adult when it came to his mother. "This isn't something that develops overnight, and it won't be resolved quickly," the therapist explained. James has spent his entire life being conditioned to prioritise his mother's emotions and approval above everything else. Meanwhile, Judith's behaviour escalated from tearful phone calls to angry texts and eventually to threats. "I'll take you to court for grandparents' rights," one message read. "You can't keep my granddaughter from me." I consulted with a family attorney who assured me that given the circumstances of Emily's illness and the documented intentional exposure, Judith would have an extremely difficult time winning any court battle for access. In fact, the attorney advised you might want to consider a temporary restraining order if the harassment continues. Emily's recovery progressed slowly. The chickenpox had been particularly severe, and our pediatrician explained she would need extra monitoring for potential immune system complications over the next several months. My parents flew in from Arizona to help providing much-needed support and giving me occasional breaks to rest. Unlike Judith, they respected our parenting decisions completely, asking questions about Emily's care routine and following our guidelines exactly. "This is what supportive family looks like," I told James during one of his visits. "They don't undermine us or think they know better. They support our decisions, even if they might have done things differently." James nodded, his eyes sad, but clearer than they'd been in years. "I'm starting to see how abnormal my relationship with my mother has always been," he admitted. "The therapist is helping me understand that her love has always been conditional on me doing exactly what she wants." 3 weeks after Emily's hospitalization, James had his first supervised visit with his mother. I insisted on being present along with the family therapist James was now seeing. Judith arrived looking both defensive and victimized. "This is ridiculous," she complained. "Being treated like a criminal for trying to help my granddaughter." "That's exactly the problem, Judith," the therapist interjected calmly. "You didn't help Emily. You endangered her health by intentionally exposing her to a virus that could have caused serious, even life-threatening complications." "Children have survived chickenpox for generations," Judith insisted. "And many haven't," I replied. "That's why we have vaccines now. That's why medical guidelines explicitly recommend against intentional exposure, especially for infants." Judith refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, maintaining that she'd acted in Emily's best interest, despite all evidence to the contrary. Most disturbing was her continued insistence that her judgment should supersede ours as parents. "I've raised 3 children," she repeated throughout the conversation. "I know what's best for children better than some doctors who just read books." The meeting ended with James finally standing firm. "Mum, unless you can respect our decisions as Emily's parents, you won't have unsupervised time with her. That's non-negotiable." Judith left in tears, calling James ungrateful and claiming I'd turned him against her. As difficult as the confrontation had been, I felt the first real hope that our family might eventually heal not by giving in to Judith's demands, but by establishing the healthy boundaries that should have existed all along. 6 months after the chickenpox incident, Emily celebrated her first birthday with a small gathering at our new apartment. James and I had decided a fresh start in a new place, one Judith had never visited and had no key to, would help us establish the boundaries we needed. Emily had fully recovered physically, though a few small scars remained on her back and forehead from the deeper blisters. Our pediatrician had given her a clean bill of health after several follow-up appointments to monitor for any lingering effects on her immune system. The past half year had brought enormous changes to our family dynamic. James continued his therapy, diligently working through the complex patterns of his relationship with his mother. The therapist had explained that James's inability to stand up to Judith wasn't simply weakness, it was the result of a lifetime of emotional manipulation. Your mother trained you from childhood to prioritize her emotional needs above your own, the therapist had explained in one joint session I attended. That kind of conditioning is extremely powerful. Breaking free requires recognizing it first, then building new patterns of interaction. James had made remarkable progress. He now maintained limited contact with Judith, a weekly phone call, and occasional supervised visits with Emily. He'd learned to recognize the manipulation tactics she employed and develop strategies to maintain his boundaries, despite her tears, anger, or guilt trips. Judith herself had gone through stages of reaction to our new boundaries. First came denial and anger, with threats of legal action and attempts to rally family members to her cause. When those failed, particularly after James's brother Matt supported our position, she shifted to playing the victim, telling anyone who would listen how cruel we were to keep her from her granddaughter. Finally, about 4 months after the incident, she reluctantly acknowledged that her actions had been inappropriate, though she still insisted they were well-intentioned. It wasn't a full apology, but it was progress. I may not agree with all your modern parenting ideas, she told me during a supervised visit, but I understand now that as Emily's mother, you have the final say. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for us to begin rebuilding a carefully structured relationship. Judith was now allowed short visits with Emily, always with either James or me present. She had to ask permission before offering Emily food or attempting any kind of care routine. Most importantly, she understood that any violation of these rules or vitals would result in an immediate end to the visit and a cooling-off period of no contact. My own healing journey had been complicated. While I'd never doubted my medical knowledge or parenting decisions, the incident had shaken my trust in James profoundly. That moment in the pharmacy parking lot with him locking our sick daughter in the car at his mother's behest had revealed a vulnerability in our family that terrified me. We attended couples counselling alongside James's individual therapy, slowly rebuilding our partnership. I watched carefully as James grew stronger in his ability to prioritize Emily's well-being above his mother's demands. Each time he maintained a boundary or stood firm against manipulation was a small restoration of the trust that had been broken. Our new apartment became a symbol of our fresh start. I'd taken the lead in child-proofing and decorating Emily's room, creating a safe, cheerful space that reflected our evidence-based parenting approach. James had installed a state-of-the-art security system, his way of symbolically protecting our daughter from any further boundary violations. I had also found my voice in unexpected ways. The experience led me to join an online support group for parents dealing with intrusive in-laws, where I shared our story. The overwhelming response helped me realize how many families struggled with similar boundary issues, though few had experienced such dangerous consequences. With encouragement from the group, I started a blog documenting our journey and providing evidence-based information about common natural parenting claims. My background in pediatric nursing gave me credibility, and my personal experience gave my words emotional weight. I was careful never to identify Judith or share specific details that might identify our family, focusing instead on the broader issues of boundaries and medical misinformation. The final turning point in our relationship with Judith came a month before Emily's birthday. After several successful supervised visits, Judith asked to join us for Emily's first birthday celebration. "I'd like to be there," she said to James during their weekly call, "but I understand if you're not comfortable with that yet." The acknowledgement of our feelings and respect for our boundaries without manipulation or guilt was unprecedented. After discussing it thoroughly, James and I agreed to invite her with clear parameters, a short visit, no gifts without prior approval, no unsolicited parenting advice. On Emily's birthday, Judith arrived with a developmentally appropriate toy we had approved and a card for Emily to open when she was older. Throughout the small gathering, she remained respectful and appropriate, even complimenting some of our parenting choices she'd previously criticized. As she prepared to leave, Judith pulled me aside. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that I've been doing some reading about modern medicine and children's health. I still believe in many natural approaches, but I recognize now that some of my information was outdated or incorrect." It wasn't a full reversal of her beliefs, but it was an acknowledgement that her perspective wasn't the only valid one. For Judith, it represented enormous growth. As our small family settled into our new normal, I reflected on the painful journey that had brought us here. The terrifying experience of watching Emily suffer had been traumatic, but it had forced all of us to confront unhealthy patterns that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. James had found his voice and his strength as a father and husband. I had discovered my own power as an advocate for my child and others. Even Judith, resistant as she had been, had begun to expand her thinking beyond the rigid beliefs she'd held for decades. Most importantly, Emily was thriving, growing into a curious, joyful toddler, surrounded by adults who were learning, however imperfectly, to put her well-being above their own egos and agendas. As I watched Emily gleefully smash her birthday cake with pudgy hands, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before her birth. The road to this moment had been painful beyond imagining, but the family we were building now was stronger, healthier, and safer because of the boundaries we'd fought to establish. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "How sometimes the hardest choices are the most important ones," I replied, "and how protecting our children means standing firm even when it would be easier not to." He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. "I promise you," he said softly, "I will never put anyone's feelings above Emily's safety again." It was a promise I now believed he could keep. Have you ever had to stand your ground to protect someone you love, even when it meant confronting family? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to support more content about navigating difficult family dynamics while protecting your children. Remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength in your own journey of parenthood and family relationships.